Hello! Welcome to another episode. History with KP. Y'all, that was so ugly. But anyway, welcome to another episode of History with Miss KP. That is me. Alright guys, and the last time we met up, we actually spoke about Henry VIII. I was teaching you guys not really about him, but more about his wives and his marriages and what their relationship was like and what happened whenever they broke up. Whether it was just a divorce or if he was like cutting their heads off and stuff like that. So we're gonna get back into it, you guys. We have 3 more wives left. Yes, he had 6 wives. So we're on the last 3, and we're just gonna pick up where we left off last time. So you guys just grab your tea, grab your popcorn, sit back. If you need your headphones, put them on, and let's get started with another episode of History with KP. Let's go. Stop. We're not doing that today. Period. Okay guys, so before we get into his 4th wife, I did forget to mention in the last video that while he was married to Boleyn, which is his 2nd wife, who he beheaded, he actually had an accident while, I believe, jousting. He was injured, and that caused a major head injury. Now, this was not the first time that he was injured while in this activity. This has happened before, but this was the worst. And it is said that he would have had some brain damage. Now, back then, they would have not been able to tell. As today, maybe if they did an MRI, they would say, oh, or they might come to the conclusion that he did have some brain damage or some kind of injury that caused him to become different than he was before. In his younger years, Henry VIII was actually a very well respected king. He was sought after as one of the most eligible bachelors out of all the other kings that were popular at that time. He was kind of at the top. He was known for being giving, kind, and just a well-respected king overall. But after that accident, he became a lot different mentally, a lot more angry, a lot more short-tempered, and it resulted in many thousands of people being beheaded during his reign. And it really started around that same time and eventually led up to the beheading of 2 of his wives. To his 4th wife, who was also named Anne. Now, this was Anne of Cleves. She was a German princess, and Henry VIII needed an alliance with Germany just for war purposes. If he had that alliance, he would be able to protect his people a little bit better on the border there, or not on the border. That didn't make any sense, guys. Gonna have to cut that out. But anyway, Henry VIII, he just needed an alliance with Germany, and marrying Anne would be perfect. So basically, he had someone go out to Germany and paint now 2 portraits for him to see. One of Anne, one of her sister, who he was also considering marrying. Now, the sister was younger than her, and basically they just did a painting of both sisters, brought it to him, and he took a liking to the picture of Anne. Now, he thought that Anne was a lovely, and from accounts from other people who have been around her, they said, oh, she's beautiful, she has an amazing look, you're gonna love her. And we'll later find out that that was kind of furthest thing from the truth, right? Now, some people say that maybe he just wasn't attracted to her. Some people say it was about his ego. So once Anne of Cleves arrived to England to meet the king, he actually went in disguise. This was actually on New Year's Day, sometimes in the 1500s. Okay. So he decided that he was going to meet her for the first time on New Year's Eve back in 1540, and he did it in a traditional way that was popular during that time. It was kind of a traditional thing to do where you celebrate New Year's Eve in disguise. I'd like to mention about Anne of Cleves is that she was a very simple princess. She's been described as not really being educated. She only spoke and she could only write and read, in German. So she wasn't necessarily cultured. She was good with pen work, or not pen work, needlework, you know, simple stuff. And the reason why they recommended her is because she was docile, she was calm, she was quiet, and they thought, okay, awesome, her calm nature will mix well with his fiery nature. And no, that sounded like a good idea. It wasn't necessarily that great of an idea, because Henry, how do I say this? He wanted a woman who was more cultured, right? He needed someone with a little pizzazz, someone who can speak to him about art, someone who could speak to him about language, culture, love, you know, the whole nine. And she wasn't really the type of person to be interested in that kind of thing, and she hadn't been educated very well, which for him wasn't a good match. Now his last wife, or not his last wife, but his second wife, Boleyn, she had all those qualities, which is the reason why he liked her so much. But obviously, you know, didn't like her too much, because he did, you know, cut her head off, you know, he took that off or whatever. But that was someone that he could relate to a little bit more than Anne, Anne of Cleves. I'm sorry guys, there's two Annes. Also, I think there's two Catherines, but we'll get to that later. So anyway, he surprised her in disguise. She didn't know who he was, and he tried to make conversation with her in disguise. So obviously she didn't know who this man was, you know what I'm saying? So he tried to make conversation with her, and she just seemed, oh, he kissed her, and like, you know, was being very flirtatious. And even though she kind of giggled and laughed about it, she didn't really pay him much attention. She wasn't really listening to him. She would like look at him every now and then and just go back to what she was doing, but she did not realize who it was. And honestly, I feel like it was just like a tearing down of his ego. Like, wow, she's gonna, you know, not pay attention to me. He gifted her also. I forgot to mention that. He gifted her, he gave her something nice, was speaking to her, he kissed her. But she was engaged to be married to the king, and if she doesn't think that that's the king, then she obviously is not going to pay attention to him, which is the right thing to do. But he did not take that lightly, I will say that. And afterwards he said, oh, well, she's playing and she's not what I expected. Now to me it doesn't seem like that was the case. To me it seems like his ego was hurt. Like, I went to go see this girl, I kissed her, I brought her, you know, some gifts, and she didn't really pay any attention to me, so now I don't find her attractive. Like, girls, y'all know whenever a guy tries to holler at you, right, and you don't take interest in them, and they're like, oh, you ugly anyway. It was one of those moments. It was basically one of those moments. But he just reported afterwards that, you know, she wasn't really all that attractive. She was very plain in nature, and he thought that she was going to be beautiful, and he felt like people were boosting her up, and he was not impressed at all. That's what he has, you know, been recorded to say, that she wasn't all that to him. Right? Even though he felt this way, he still decided to go ahead with the marriage, and so they still ended up getting married. The whole time she did not know that her soon-to-be husband did not find her attractive at all. Okay, so boom, wedding night, right? They're already married. He went through with it, even though he claims that he is not attracted to her and she's too plain for him. She's not all that. Right? So that wedding night, he actually confided to Cromwell, and Cromwell is going to be the one who basically described who she was and gave him the account of what she looked like and brought the paintings. Now, he did not paint the paintings, he just brought the paintings, okay? So he confided to Cromwell that I liked her before not well, but now I like her much worse. So after seeing her on their wedding night, he was even less attracted to her, and he let Cromwell know that he was not able to consummate the marriage, which ended up happening for about 6 months. Now, when Anne was asked how her marriage was going, this is what she said. When he comes to bed, he kisseth me, and he taketh me by the hand, and biddeth me good night, sweetheart. And in the morning kisseth me and biddeth me farewell, darling. So basically she was saying, you know, I think everything's going well with this marriage. He's very kind to me, he speaks to me kindly, he greets me in the morning, he greets me before bed, and I think that everything's going well so far. However, unbeknownst to her, it was going a lot worse than she probably even realized. She thought everything was fine. He did not. He was already over it. And after 6 months of marriage, they still had not consummated the marriage. He could not find himself attracted enough to her to actually, you know, do the deed. And, you know, obviously back then the most important thing was bearing a son. He needed a son, he needed a son, he needed a son. And even though he had a son prior, it's still always good to have, you know, your main and then a spare, you know. So if you get what I'm saying, because if something happens back then, it was very likely for a kid not to survive childhood. So he still needed to consummate the marriage, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. And so he had an annulment. She agreed with it, probably because she knew if she protested, he probably would, you know, take her head off too. So she went ahead and just agreed to the annulment. And in return, he made sure that she was taken care of. She got, I believe, like a monthly allowance. She stayed in a nice place, which I also believe belonged to the previous inn that he was married to. I believe that it belonged to her family, but he gave it to her for her to stay, and she was going to be taken care of as long as she stayed in England. She couldn't go to Germany. He wouldn't take care of her there. She had to stay in England, what she did. And honestly, at the end of the day, she's probably the luckiest wife, because even though she was only married to him 6 months, it was a 6 months that wasn't what's the word, it wasn't a chaotic 6 months. She didn't really understand what was going on anyway. She thought everything was fine, but she would rather take that than take, you know, a chop to the head, right? So basically that's how his 4th marriage ended. It was an annulment. And now we're gonna move on to wife number 5. Okay guys, so wife number 5 is actually pretty interesting, and I'm gonna tell you why. Now at this point, Henry VIII was starting to get obese. Let's just keep it real here and say what it is, right? Once he had that accident, he actually injured his leg, and it was oozing, it was smelling, and he was gaining weight. He was eating the same amount he was eating before, but now he couldn't get around well, which meant excuse me, which meant stay healthy. His leg was seriously injured, it had ulcers, and it was oozing and it was smelling, and so he just wasn't the appealing young king that he used to be. He was known for being handsome before. Now he just seemed kind of gross, and especially gross to a 15-year-old girl. But this is Catherine Howard, you guys, and she was only 15 years old, which is very young whenever she married the king, and they were only married for 3 years. Now it turns out that when he had his annulment to Anne of Cleves previously, it was done in early July, and then by July 28th, he had already married he had already married Catherine. Now Catherine is actually Anne's maid of honor in their wedding, so that's kind of like a little backstabby, I guess, but you know, back then everybody just wanted to be queen, so it probably didn't really matter to her. And also, who's going to tell the king no? I also want to mention that previously, I'm kind of moving a little bit backwards, previously, whenever he was looking for wives, as far as Anne of Cleves go, he went for a different princess, and she said no, and she said no because he was known for beheading his wives. And she said, hey, if I had a second head, I would gratefully and I would willingly marry Henry VIII. So she was a savage. She was like, I'm not marrying that man because I don't want to be next, right? And she was smart for doing that, because let's figure out what happened with wife number 5, okay? He actually very much cared for her. He was enamored with her. She was young, she was beautiful, she was charismatic, and she was cultured, which worked perfectly for him. That's what he liked, but she wasn't very much interested in him, as he was 49 years old and aging not so well. He smelled and he was just overweight, and she wasn't really interested. You know what 15-year-old girl would be interested in that? Let's be honest here, right? So he had found out that previously she had had some affairs, one being with her cousin, one being with someone she was engaged to, and then a former music teacher. And back then, that was not okay. That was a no-no. If you're going to be married to a king, if you're going to be married at all, then you needed to be a virgin first. And she was not a virgin, which he ended up using against her. So eventually, Parliament actually passed a law stating that women who had lost their virginities prior to marrying a king could not be married to a king. And that gave Henry the perfect opportunity to go ahead and do his favorite thing to do, which is accuse someone of treason. Everybody commits treason against him. He cut off the head of his 5th wife. So this was the 2nd wife he had done this to. Not the only person in England he had done it to. There had been several other people that had suffered, including the man who brought him Anne of Cleves. He blamed him and accused him of treason as well, and his head was chopped off prior to his 5th wife, Anne of Cleves. Now, it is actually believed that she was having affairs with other people during her marriage to Henry, so this time it wasn't all in his head. She was actually cheating on him, but he did take it a little bit far with the beheading. But 3 years into the marriage, at 18 years of age, she lost her head for treason and for adultery. Let's move on to wife number 6, his final wife, the wife that probably got out the luckiest. All right, guys. So basically, he married Catherine Parr next in, looks like 1543. He was married to her, and she was actually a lot closer in his age. Now, he was still definitely older than her by like 20 years, because I believe he was in his 50s. She was 36 at the time, but it made more sense because she had been previously married twice and she was not a teenager, unlike his last wife. Now, if I was her, I would have been a little bit scared to marry this man, but it seems like she must have felt like she didn't have anything to lose because she ended up marrying him. All right, so she married him at 36 years of age. And she had been widowed twice before. She had been married twice. Both of her husbands had died. This was her 3rd marriage. Now, she actually took a liking to his children and devoted herself to making sure that they were properly educated and well taken care of. And she also took very great care of Henry. She was very influential with the court, with I guess designing the court and art and those kinds of things. She was very hands-on with that, and she was one of the only wives that he kind of gave that power to be so creative within his kingdom. But he did allow her to have that leniency. Now, she took care of him in his poor health. She cleaned his sores. She made sure that he was doing she made sure that he was comfortable, basically, in the last few years of his life. Now, this woman almost lost her head too, and I'm going to tell you why. It was sympathetic towards Protestants, which Henry had huge issue with. All right, he was not okay with that. And after a conversation and disagreeing on the beliefs of the Protestants, he decided that she should be arrested. So he actually had his guards come and arrest her, because he was like, girl, you're not allowed to disagree with me. I'm right, you're wrong, right? So she was arrested for giving her beliefs, but was able to talk him off the ledge and keep her head, because she said, I was simply learning. I wasn't disagreeing with you, my king. I was learning. Okay, let's calm down. Let's keep it together. It's okay. It's all right. We're good. You just were teaching me and I was listening. And because of that, she was able to continue to live, which was awesome of her to be able to talk him down, because you couldn't talk this man off of anything if you haven't seen from the previous 2 wives. She was about to be the 3rd. But long story short, she stayed married to him for only a few years, actually, and he actually ended up passing away. Now, before he passed away, she actually convinced him to allow his 2 children, which he had, or his, first of all, he had 3 children. Sorry, guys, he had 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth, and his son, right? And 2 of those children were from previous, or all 3 of those children were from previous marriages, but 2 of them, one, the mothers had been beheaded, and the other one, the mother had been divorced, so they weren't necessarily considered to be, in the coming for the kingdom. But she basically talked Henry into him reinstating his children, bringing them back in, and he listened to her. Very short, she was able to survive because he died. And she was able to keep all the dresses, all the jewelry after he passed away, and she moved on with her life. And honestly, she should be happy that they weren't married long enough for him to find something else in her that he didn't like and to remove her head for it. So basically, after he had passed away and his tyranny had ended, he decided to, or she decided, sorry guys, she decided that she was gonna get married again. She married someone she had previously had some type of relationship with, and she married him about 6 months after her divorce, or not divorce, after her husband had passed away. And this was her 4th husband, and she became pregnant and she actually died during childbirth. Hope that that was interesting for you guys. That was the 6th wife. But guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was fun, it was interesting, it was poppy. Please do not forget to like, share, subscribe. I love to hear you guys' comments. Leave a comment, but don't forget to, you know, send this to your friends, guys. I'm trying to get my views up, I'm trying to get my subscribers up, and I just want to say thank you for the support. And if you have any suggestions for me for a story I should do next, please just leave a comment and let me know, and maybe, you never know, I might do that next time. So guys, just leave some comments, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Bye.